Imagine you spend 30 years climbing a ladder. Every rung you work for, every step up you earn. You get better at climbing, you get faster, you develop a real skill for it. And one day you reach the top, pull yourself over the final rung, and realize the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. That image belongs to Stephen Covey. And the reason it has stayed in circulation for nearly 40 years is that most people, if they are honest with themselves, have felt a version of that feeling at some point. Busy but not sure what they are building. Productive but not sure it is the right thing. Successful by the metrics that surround them, but not entirely clear those metrics are the right ones. The argument that runs through every page of this book is that most people are so focused on how to climb the ladder that they have never seriously asked whether it is against the right wall. Effectiveness in Covey's world is not about technique. It is not about getting more done faster. It is about making sure what you are doing is actually taking you somewhere worth going. And the path there is not a set of tips. It is a transformation of character. Welcome to Bookmark, where we explain the most valuable books in the simplest way possible, whether you are commuting, working out, or just going about your day. Just press play, and we make sure the knowledge finds you, not the other way around. Today we are covering The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Published in 1989 and never out of print, this book has sold over 40 million copies and been read by presidents, CEOs, military leaders, and ordinary people at every stage of life. It is regularly cited as one of the most influential business books ever written. And yet it is not really a business book. It is a book about how to be a person. Before we go further, something worth naming directly. The title makes some people roll their eyes. 7 Habits sounds like a listicle. Highly Effective sounds like corporate language. And the book has been so widely cited, so often quoted in meetings and motivational posters, that some people assume they already know what is in it without ever having read it. They almost certainly do not. Because the surface-level version of these ideas that circulates in workplaces and online is a pale shadow of what the book actually argues. The real argument is deeper, more demanding, and more interesting than most people realize. This book is built around a distinction between what Covey calls the personality ethic and the character ethic. For much of the 20th century, he observed, success literature was dominated by the personality ethic. The idea that the path to success runs through skills of presentation, social technique, positive thinking, and communication strategy. Dress for the job you want. Smile confidently. Learn to network, project the right image. There is nothing wrong with these things in isolation. But the most enduring success literature, the books and philosophy that shaped the first 150 years of American history, was built on something completely different. The character ethic. The idea that effectiveness flows from who you are, not from how you appear. From your values, your integrity, your fundamental orientation toward other people and toward the world. The 7 habits are 7 expressions of the character ethic in practice. They are not tricks, they are ways of being. And they divide into 3 movements, each one building on the last. The first 3 habits move you from dependence to independence, from being shaped by your circumstances and other people to taking real responsibility for your own choices and direction. The next 3 habits move you from independence to interdependence, from being self-reliant to being someone who builds true partnerships and produces results with other people that neither could produce alone. And the 7th habit is the one that makes all the others sustainable. Keeping yourself sharp enough to do the work the other 6 habits require. Let us start at the beginning. The first 3 habits are about the relationship between you and yourself, not in a self-help cliché sense, in a very specific, practical sense. They are about whether you are actually in charge of your own life or whether you are simply responding to whatever the world throws at you. Habit 1. Be proactive. This is the most foundational habit in the book. Without it, the other 6 are essentially irrelevant. Being proactive does not just mean taking initiative or getting ahead of problems. It means something more precise. It means understanding that between stimulus and response there is a space. And in that space lies your freedom to choose. Most people, most of the time, operate reactively. Something happens, they respond. The response feels automatic, feels natural, feels like the only possible response. Someone is rude to them and they feel irritated. A plan falls apart and they feel anxious. A colleague criticizes their work and they feel defensive. The stimulus produces the response almost without any conscious choice in between. Proactive people understand that the response is always a choice. Not that the feeling is a choice. You do not choose to feel irritated or anxious or defensive, but what you do with that feeling, how you respond to the situation, is yours. Always. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, is the person Covey credits with helping him understand this idea most deeply. Frankl observed that even in the most extreme conditions of human suffering, where every external freedom had been taken away, one freedom remained. The freedom to choose one's attitude toward one's circumstances. The freedom to decide what meaning to assign to what was happening. Covey is not making a trivial point. He is making the most serious point in the book. The degree to which you are proactive, the degree to which you consistently act from your values rather than react to your circumstances, determines more about the quality and direction of your life than almost any other single factor. There is a tool that makes this tangible. The circle of concern and the circle of influence. Your circle of concern contains everything you care about. The economy, the news, what other people think of you, whether it rains this weekend, what your competitor is doing, how your industry is changing. The list is enormous. Your circle of influence contains everything you can actually do something about. Your own behavior, your skills, your choices, your responses, your preparation, your relationships within your reach. Reactive people spend most of their energy in the circle of concern, worrying about, talking about, and focusing on things they cannot control. The result is that they feel increasingly powerless, and their circle of influence tends to shrink. Proactive people focus their energy in the circle of influence. They work on what they can actually affect, and as a result, their circle of influence tends to grow. Not because the world becomes less uncertain, but because they become more capable, more reliable, and more trusted within their actual sphere of action. The practical question this habit asks you is simple and difficult in equal measure. Of all the things you are currently spending energy on, how much of it is actually within your control? Habit 2. Begin with the end in mind. If habit 1 is about taking responsibility for your choices, habit 2 is about making sure those choices are pointed in the right direction. Covey opens this section with an exercise that is uncomfortable and clarifying in equal measure. Imagine your own funeral. Imagine 4 people who will speak about your life. Someone from your family, a friend, a colleague, someone from your community or your faith. What would you want each of them to say? Not what they would currently say if it happened tomorrow. What you would want them to say if your life went the way you most deeply hoped it would. Most people find this exercise either powerful or unsettling. Sometimes both. Because for many people, the gap between what they would want to be said and what they are currently doing to make it true is significant. And confronting that gap is the beginning of what Covey calls clarifying your personal mission. The principle underneath this habit is that all things are created twice. First in the mind, then in the world. Every building exists as a plan before it exists as a structure. Every significant achievement exists as an intention before it exists as a reality. Most people allow the first creation, the mental one, to happen by default. They drift into their careers, their relationships, their habits, their identities, shaped by the expectations of others, the accidents of circumstance, and the path of least resistance. The highly effective person creates the first creation deliberately. They decide, with as much clarity as they can manage, what kind of person they want to be and what kind of life they want to build. And they use that clarity as the compass that orients every smaller decision that follows. A personal mission statement is the practical expression of this. Not a corporate document, a deeply personal articulation of your values, your purpose, and how you want to show up in the world. Something that changes slowly, if at all, because it is built on the things that are most fundamentally you. This is the wall checking function. Before you climb, you look up and ask whether this is actually the right wall. And you do it not once, but consistently, returning to your core principles whenever you are uncertain about what to do next. Habit 3. Put first things first. This is the habit where things become most immediately practical. It addresses the gap between knowing what matters and actually spending your time on it. Most people, even people who have done the work of Habit 2 and know what they value and where they want to go, still find themselves spending most of their days on things that do not reflect those priorities. Not because they are undisciplined, but because they have never thought clearly about how to structure their time around their values. The gap between what matters and what gets your time is what the time management matrix is built to close. It divides everything you do into 4 quadrants based on 2 dimensions: urgency and importance. Quadrant 1 is urgent and important. The crises, the deadlines, the emergencies, the things that demand your attention right now. Most people are familiar with this quadrant because most people spend a significant portion of their working lives here. Quadrant 2 is important but not urgent. Planning, relationship building, learning, preparation, prevention. The things that would make an enormous difference to your life and work if you did them consistently, but that never demand your attention because they are not yet crises. Quadrant 3 is urgent but not important. Interruptions, many emails, most meetings that could have been an email, requests from other people that feel pressing but do not actually advance anything that matters to you. Quadrant 4 is neither urgent nor important. Mindless scrolling, busy work, distractions that consume time without producing anything. Most people spend their time in Quadrant 1 dealing with crises, and in Quadrant 3 dealing with urgent requests that feel important but are not. They spend very little time in Quadrant 2. And Quadrant 2 is where almost all the things that would actually transform their work and their lives live. The prescription is to ruthlessly protect and expand Quadrant 2 time. Not by ignoring Quadrant 1, which sometimes truly demands attention, but by investing in Quadrant 2 so consistently that Quadrant 1 crises become rarer. The person who plans and prepares has fewer emergencies. The person who builds relationships before they need them has more support when things get hard. The person who maintains their health in Quadrant 2 is not managing a health crisis in Quadrant 1. Effectiveness is largely a function of how much of your time lives in Quadrant 2. These first 3 habits have moved you from reactive to proactive, from drifting to intentional, from busy to focused. They have established what Covey calls the private victory. The victory you win within yourself, in the relationship between you and your own values, choices, and commitments. But effectiveness in isolation is a limited thing. Most of what matters in a professional and personal life happens in relationship with other people. And the next 3 habits are about how to make those relationships actually work. There is a trap that many people fall into after they have worked hard on their own independence, their own discipline, their own effectiveness. The trap of believing that self-reliance is the destination. Covey is clear that independence is not the goal. It is a stage, a necessary one. You cannot honestly partner with others if you are dependent on them for your sense of self, your decisions, and your emotional stability. But once you have achieved real independence, the next challenge is not to stay there. It is to move into something more powerful. Interdependence. The ability to produce results with other people that neither of you could produce alone. The 3 habits in this movement are the ones most commonly misunderstood as being about social skills or communication technique. They are not. They are about a fundamental orientation toward other people that changes the quality of every interaction you have with them. Habit 4. Think win-win. Most people approach competitive or collaborative situations with one of a small number of mental models. Win-lose. I succeed when you fail. There is only so much to go around and I need to make sure I get my share. Common in organizations where people are measured against each other rather than against shared goals. Lose-win. The people-pleasing model. I concede, I accommodate, I do not push back, because I want to be liked and I do not want conflict. This feels cooperative, but it is not. It is a slow erosion of your own effectiveness and often produces quiet resentment that eventually surfaces badly. Lose-lose. I would rather we both lose than let you win. The revenge model, sometimes disguised as principle. Win-win is the model Covey champions, and it is worth being precise about what he means. Win-win does not mean compromise, where both parties get less than they wanted. It does not mean being generous at your own expense. It means the disciplined search for solutions that are actually good for both parties. It is harder than the other models. It requires the confidence to advocate for your own interests and the empathy to understand the other person's. It requires the creativity to find solutions that neither party could have seen from their own perspective alone. And it requires the maturity to sometimes walk away from a deal that cannot be made into a true win-win. Every relationship works like an account. Covey calls it the emotional bank account, and every interaction is either a deposit or a withdrawal. Keeping promises, showing kindness, being honest, listening carefully, these are deposits. Breaking promises, disrespecting someone, dismissing their concerns, being inconsistent, these are withdrawals. The balance of that account determines the quality of the relationship. And more practically, it determines how much trust and goodwill you have available when you need to have a difficult conversation, make a significant request, or navigate a disagreement. Win-win thinking, sustained over time, consistently deposits into every emotional bank account you hold. And the cumulative interest on those deposits is the foundation on which everything else in the interdependent section is built. Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. This is the habit that most people consider the most immediately applicable in their daily lives, and it is also the one most consistently violated in almost every conversation. Most of the time, we listen not to understand, but to reply. We hear what someone is saying, we begin formulating our response, and by the time they finish speaking, we are ready with an answer, a counter-argument, an example of our own experience that relates to theirs. We were listening to the words, but we were thinking about ourselves. Covey calls this autobiographical listening, and he identifies 4 ways it typically shows up. Evaluating what the other person is saying, whether you agree or disagree. Probing with questions based on your own frame rather than theirs. Advising before you fully understand the situation. Interpreting their experience through the lens of your own. The alternative is what he calls empathic listening. Listening not just to the words, but to the intent behind the words. Listening with the goal of understanding the other person's reality as fully as possible before offering anything of your own. There is a story in the book about a father who approaches his son and says, "You can come and help me in the garden." The son says, "No thanks." The father asks why. The son says, "I do not feel like it." The father says, "It will help you feel better to be active." The son says, "I just want to be alone." At no point in this exchange does the father actually listen to the son. He hears the words, but he is already thinking about what to say. He is trying to fix and advise before he understands what the problem actually is. Empathic listening would involve the father sitting down, being fully present, and letting the son feel that his experience, whatever it is worth listening to without an immediate solution. The payoff of this habit is not just emotional, it is practical. The person who understands a situation fully before responding is far more likely to respond effectively than the person who jumps to solutions based on an incomplete picture. Covey pairs this with the second half of the habit, which is equally important. Seek to be understood. Once you have truly listened, once the other person feels truly heard, they become capable of actually hearing you. The psychological reality is that people who feel understood are far more open to being influenced than people who feel dismissed or misunderstood. You cannot sincerely seek win-win if you do not understand what the other person actually needs, and you cannot understand that if you are not willing to listen before you speak. Habit 6. Synergise. This is the habit that most people find the hardest to explain and the most striking when they experience it. Synergy is the idea that the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts, that two people working together, if the conditions are right, can produce something that neither could have produced independently, not just a combination of their two contributions, something new that neither of them would have created alone. The claim is that synergy is not an accident. It is a product of the first 5 habits working together. When two people are both proactive, both clear on their values, both thinking win-win, both truly listening to each other, the creative possibilities that open up in that relationship are qualitatively different from what is available in any other kind of interaction. The key ingredient is valuing difference, not tolerating difference, not managing difference, actually valuing it. The person who sees your perspective differently from you is not a problem to be resolved. They are a resource. Because the difference between your perspective and theirs, if you can hold both simultaneously, is often where the most creative and most effective solutions live. Most people spend their collaborative energy trying to bring others around to their own view. The prescription is to be curious enough about other views that you are always asking what you might be missing. Because the habit of always seeking the third alternative, the solution that is better than what either party proposed, is what produces the results that neither party could have imagined from the beginning of the conversation. These 3 habits, win-win, seek first to understand, and synergize, together constitute what Covey calls the public victory. The victories you win not alone but in relationship with others. And now we arrive at the 7th habit, the one that sits outside the sequence. The one that makes all the others possible, not just for a week or a month, but for a lifetime. Habit 7. Sharpen the saw. There is a story Covey tells about coming across a man in a forest, sawing frantically at a tree. The man is exhausted. His progress is slow. Covey asks how long he has been at it. Hours, the man says. Covey suggests that maybe he should stop and sharpen the saw. The man looks up impatiently. I do not have time to sharpen the saw. I am too busy sawing. That image is what habit 7 is about. The saw is you. Your physical capacity, your mental capacity, your emotional and social well-being, your sense of meaning and purpose. And the question the habit asks is simple. How much time do you invest in maintaining and developing the instrument through which all of your effectiveness flows? Most people, most of the time, do not invest enough. They run the saw until it is dull and then wonder why the work is taking so long. Renewal happens across 4 dimensions, each one essential, each one interconnected. The physical dimension: exercise, nutrition, rest, stress management. The basics: the things that most people know they should do and consistently under-prioritize. Your body is the foundation of everything else. The energy available to you for every other habit depends on how well you are maintaining it. This is not vanity, it is infrastructure. The mental dimension: reading, learning, planning, writing. The deliberate expansion of your capacity to think clearly and see widely. The person who reads broadly and thinks carefully has access to mental resources that no other form of preparation provides. At minimum, an hour of focused reading per day. Not news, not email. Substance. Books. Ideas. The thinking of people who have spent years on questions that matter. The social and emotional dimension. Your relationships. Your emotional intelligence. Your capacity for empathy, for constructive conflict, for building the trust that makes interdependence possible. This dimension is renewed not by anything you do alone, but by how you show up in the relationships that matter most to you. The spiritual dimension. Covey is careful here. He is not prescribing religious belief. He is pointing to something that every serious tradition of human wisdom across history has pointed to. The need for a connection to something larger than yourself. A clear sense of your own values and purpose. A regular practice of reflection. Whether that comes through religious practice, time in nature, meditation, or serious journaling, The effect is the same. It reconnects you to the why beneath the what. The critical insight about this habit is not that these four dimensions are important. Most people know they are important. The insight is that they are not in competition with the first six habits. They are the source of them. The person who is physically depleted cannot sustain the discipline that habit one requires. The person who never reads or learns cannot access the clarity that habit two requires. The person who neglects their relationships cannot build the trust that habits 4 and 5 require. And the person who has lost connection to their own purpose cannot sustain the motivation that any of the habits require over the long run. Sharpening the saw is not a luxury for when you have enough time. It is the investment that creates the time, the energy, and the clarity to do everything else. Each cycle of renewal makes the next cycle of effort more effective. And over time, the compounding of that investment produces results that no amount of unsustained heroic effort ever could. There is one more idea that sits beneath all 7 habits, worth naming before we close. Covey calls it the inside-out approach. Most people approach the problems in their lives from the outside in. They look for changes in circumstances, in other people, in systems and structures to produce the changes they want to see in their own experience. If my boss were different, if my organization were different, if my circumstances were different, then I could be more effective, more satisfied, more myself. The inside-out approach reverses this. It begins with the premise that lasting change begins inside, with your values, with your character, with the quality of your relationship to your own choices and responsibilities. This does not mean circumstances do not matter, they do. It means that the most reliable path to changing the world you operate in runs through changing the person you bring to it, and that is the thread connecting all 7 habits. So what does the book actually look like, assembled into one picture? The first 3 habits build the private victory. Be proactive and take real responsibility for your choices. Begin with the end in mind and make sure your ladder is against the right wall. Put first things first and protect the quadrant. 2 time where the most important work lives. The next 3 habits build the public victory. Think win-win and look for solutions that are actually good for everyone. Seek first to understand and give the other person the experience of being truly heard before you ask to be heard yourself. Synergise and value the differences that, when you hold them together, produce outcomes neither party could have imagined alone. And the 7th habit makes all the others sustainable. Sharpen the saw. Renew yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Not as a reward for productivity, as the source of it. The inside-out approach connects all of them. Real change, lasting change, begins inside. In your values, your character, your orientation toward the world. Not in your circumstances, your techniques, or your ability to project the right image. This book was published in 1989. 35 years of management thinking, productivity research, and organizational psychology have accumulated since then. The 7 habits are as relevant today as they were when they were written, because character was always the foundation, and it still is. And that is everything from the 7 habits of highly effective people today on Bookmark. If this is the kind of learning that works for you, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below telling us which book you want us to explain next. We read every single one. See you on the next one.